This is Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty in a Google search for my site. I'll be reading from Outside Magazine, report August 7th, 2018. I'm reading this in November. I discovered by chance the citibike bike share program. I had this feeling it was new, and although I'm not wrong, it's not a decade old. This article shows that it's developed. People have discovered it well before me and done something with it. The leader of the leaders is in this article, and that man is probably at the top of the leaderboard right now. It's written by Tom Vanderbilt, and the title is The Angel Who Keeps Citibike Working for New York. New York Citibike, one of the largest bike share programs in the world, relies on a volunteer army to help redistribute some 12,000 bicycles among 750 stations each day, ensuring that users grab a ride when they need one. Most of these volunteers do it out-of-the-way deliveries a month. Then there's Joe Miller, whose superhuman efforts seem to defy any plausible explanation. Sometimes late at night, even when the rambunctious streets of New York Lower's East Side have stilled, Joe Miller dreams turns to citibike. He's not dreaming of the 45-pound, 3-speed, bright blue, this is a reader's note, 45 pounds is the weight of a citibike. I knew the bikes were heavy. This is the first time I've seen that number. A typical, a lightweight racing bike can be less than 20 pounds. I return to the outside text. He is not dreaming of the 45-pound, 3-speed, bright blue, bank logo emblazoned workhorses of the Gotham bike share system, nor is he somnolenti replaying a sunset cruise down the Hudson River Greenway. He's dreaming of the points. I'll be having an unrelated dream, he says, and it'll creep in. I'll notice that there's this impossibly large drop-off to pick up loop. This, he says, is awful. So he'll talk himself down, open up a metacognitive moment in his immersed REM state. What are you doing? I don't want to think about this right now. Go away. The specter haunting Joe Miller's sleep is Citibike's Bike Angel program. The angels are Citibike's users who earn points, which entitle them to various rewards for taking a bike from a particularly crowded docking station or leaving a bike at a particularly depleted one. The most satisfying holistic points producing move is to combine the two. Take a bike from a dock that's full and drop it off at one that doesn't have enough. The industry's parlance, the angels are helping restore equilibrium to the network, constantly thrown out of whack by users. So vital is this task to the success of any bike share system, even those that don't use docks, that rebalance tends to be done expensively with box trucks and boots on the ground. It's an ideal world. The system would self-rebalance. Riders would get bikes where they need to. As a matter of course, the angels are trying to take us to that nirvana via an alternative route, and their success may help determine the fate of the still burgeoning bike share industry. Almost since the Bike Angel program started last September, Another reader's note. I am now reading this in November. I had a feeling this program was new. I now have the start date. At the time of this reading, November 2018, the program is more than a year old. Almost since Bike Angels, end of reader's note, I return to the text of Outside magazine. Almost since the Bike Angels program started last September, Miller has owned the #1 spot on its leaderboard. It isn't because he will casually go out, bite out a bit out of his way every day to commit a random act of kindness. It's because he spends a good portion of his waking hours and some non-waking ones physically moving bikes or thinking about moving bikes on Citibike's app stations that need rebalancing and are highlighted on the map, along with a number of points Angels can earn by moving a bike to or from those locations. Most tasks net Angels between 1 and 5 points, depending on the level of need. As of April, Miller had more than 22,000 lifetime points, and he was routinely racking up more than 3,000 per month. Miller has biked more than 12,000 miles, all within New York City limits. To put in perspective, I too became a bike angel after receiving an email last fall that carefully hinted at the good I could do and the goodies I could get. Membership extensions, gift cards, the fabled white key instead of the standard blue fob used by every other user, bike share schmuck. Since signing up in September, after a period of semi-steady bike use, I've accumulated a grand total of 70 points. The person speaking, the point 70, another reader's note, 70 points belong to the man who wrote this article for Outside Magazine. This reader, me, Tom Duty, currently has 8 points. Miller frequently gets more. That's a career to date, 8 points. Tom Duty has a career to date, 8 points. Miller frequently gets more than that in an afternoon. In fact, as I write this, he has made 11,362 city bike trips, covering more than 12,000 miles. You might have heard about the guy a few years back who rode city bike across the country. Miller has covered that distance more than 4 times without even leaving New York City. Early one cool spring day with mildly threatening clouds in the sky, I set out to meet Miller. In the fields, hoping to glean his strategies and learn something about the person lurking behind the shadowy JM009 tag, which is perched atop the Bike Angels leaderboard with the permanence of a stone gargoyle. Because the locations of available points are refreshed on City Bike app every quarter of an hour, getting him to commit to a meeting balance in advance was impossible. We'll let the algorithm and the morning's bike activity dictate, Miller emailed. At appointment time, after a meeting in Tribeca, I texted him. Miller fires back that he is still at a Dummins gearing keyboard slippage for summons hearing. The Angel system is quiet. No big points on the board, which Miller blames on the gloomy raininess. He suggests Brooklyn, so I walk a few blocks to a point offering City Bike Station. World comes as I climb the Manhattan Bridge bike path, Bergen and Flatbush. When I arrive, I see Miller, bearded and watch-capped, wearing running shoes, shorts, a 2013 Chicago Marathon t-shirt, and a Camelback standing on the pedals of a city bike, pumping up Bergen's slight incline. As we exchange mildly sweaty handshakes, he explained that we will be doing loops, taking a bike from one station a few blocks away, riding it to this one, running back down to the other station and repeating the process. A realization draws. I had rather naively thought that Miller made organically flowing journeys across the city in pursuit of his points. But Miller was farming, or interval training points, farming as he calls it. We make the loop over and over, playing fast and loose with traffic lights. He's been busted, attracting looks from passerbyers from a sight of a man, me, running in the street, clothes with an aero bike helmet. Long story. The goal is to complete as many loops as possible in the allotted 15 minutes. In a version of physics concept called an observer effect, the actions that the system is compelling us to make are charging the system. When the refreshment comes, the points at the station will likely disappear. Over the next hour, hitting 2 separate farms, I totaled more than 20 points, enough to add a week to my citibike membership. Take a room full of top Hollywood screenwriters, give them a week and a few cases of Red Bull, and they could not come up with a more appropriate character than Joe Miller, the bike angel. A 33-year-old New York native, Miller began citibike after the system launched in 2013. For the reasons most people do, his bikes kept getting stolen. This is a reader's note. Tom Duty. This is one of the reasons I'm so happy with citibike. Stolen bicycles. I returned to the text of Outside Magazine. He didn't have room for them in his apartment, and he couldn't resist the system's allure. It was just a very convenient thing, he says. And back then, it was $95 a year, which is almost giving them away. As an avid runner who sometimes jogs to his job in advertising, Miller has begun dog running. On the side, a more aerobically challenging dog walking service provided for athletic breeds. That's when he began using citibike in earnest, so much so that he soon got a call from a publicist. A newspaper was chronicling citibike's most active users. On the surprise, he was #1. Growing up in New York City, you're sort of raised not to think in the context of you're on top of this thing. There's just people everywhere, he tells me. This is atop a Brooklyn brunch spot where after initially declining my offer of food, I really only do 1 meal per day. He finally relents, accepting coffee and an appetizer. I see what these spicy, charred Brussels sprouts are all about. Miller had heard rumors of Bike Angel's program when it was in beta, but he signed up only last September when most other angels did. Once I joined, I saw the app had this map on it. I saw these points, he says, and then the leaderboard. He sensed cognitive dissonance. If the top city biker was not also the top bike angel, something powerful clicked in his brain. He saw a way to use all the experience he had accrued of a lifelong video game and advanced board game player. I approach things with a lot of strategy, he says, thinking of how to optimize things. By then, Miller had left his day job and was going all in. With his dog running service called Run Dog, that summons hearing was off having a dog off the leash, park past allowed hour. This meant he had more journeys to make, the more spare time, and that is the desire to make New York more bike-friendly, and more broadly, the world a better place. And the die was cast. I started to put together a plan, looking at the map, seeing what I would have to average, and even begin to try to win for that month. Despite having joined midway through September, he still landed third. Miller had since owned the leaderboard. The first day of the month, just after midnight turnover, when the top 10 is posted, he says he will come out swinging and net 80 points in an hour and a half, enough for a month-long membership. extension, a big statement of intent in December, taking a slightly risky maneuver on a city bike in gridlock traffic. He was hit from behind by a car. It was not even points farming. Miller says, I was just going home. A slight fracture and a facial bruise didn't stop him from amassing a record of 4 points that month. 4, 4, 4, 4. The numerical symmetry was intentional. And yes, he says it's something about Miller's personality. I just wanted to rise above, he says. All the while, he was running anywhere from 6 to 20 miles a day with his clients' dogs. Miller's strategy is to go big or go easy. He checks the app looking for stations offering 3 and 4 points. There were scarcely any today, or some that are close together without a hill in between. He maxes out on promotion multipliers. He keeps a hawk eye on the City Bike network, making him feel, he says, intrinsically tied to the system. Indeed, as we're eating, he occasionally thumb swipes the City Bike app looking for interesting movement glitches in the matrix. Joe Miller had a work rebalancing City Bike in New York City. Nancy, Joe... He also relies on old-fashioned New York hustle and guile. Once he noticed that a station inside the Brooklyn Navy Yard was offering 5 points for pickup. That's because the Navy Yard is a gated facility. People like to ride bikes in and tend not to move them out until they leave for the day. Miller, a member of the 500 Station Club, an official group of users City Bike recognizes for having docked a bike or taking one out from 500 or more New Yorkers' 750 stations. He had never been inside. I just wanted to check the station off my list, he explains. He donned a City Bike beanie. He's been swagged and told the guards he was working part-time for the company. He got the points. When the City Bike launched, I joined straight away, proudly received my blue key, but I hardly used the bikes and let my membership lapse after a year. The problem was simple. Transportation planners estimate that most people won't walk more than a quarter of a mile to get any sort of transit. The closest bike sharing system, a mile from my Brooklyn apartment, the subway was 1 block. You do the math. I was living in embodiment of the last mile problem, the needlesome point of friction that troubles delivery networks of any kind, where they're moving goods or people. The last mile is often the costly mile, time-consuming, part of the trip. It's virtually why bike share was invented. The most powerful use of bike share is actually serving as the first last mile connection, says Kate Fillier, who is the director of strategy at the New York-based National Association City Transportation Officials, NACTO. Bike share programs are really part of the transportation network in the places where they work best. There are 2 cardinal rules. If you want bike share to overcome the last mile problem, sharing locations need to be close to where people are, and they need to actually be bikes at them. City Bike addressed the first by adding more stations after its initial launch. Indeed, following a 2015 expansion effort, which planted a bike share station the same distance away from my front door, Subway One became a regular user. The Angels program is aimed at the second rule, which involves something much harder: infrastructure, changing riders' behavior, even if only a small number of them. On another rain-dampened morning, I ride 3.2 miles from my apartment to the headquarters of Motivate, which runs City Bike as well as bike share programs in 7 other U.S. cities, where I meet Julie Wood, Motivate's communication chief, and Colin Waldock, who manages the Bike Angels program. I mentioned the vicarious relief I felt when I noticed someone claiming the last dock space at the station. I passed, but I worried about the next person to arrive, who would be in bike share parlance. Dock blocked. Seeing the world through Bike Angel's eyes, I wondered aloud to Wood and Waldock whether one act, either supplying or emptying, ranks higher in the system's algorithms. I just wanted to rise above, said Miller. It's worse to be full than to be empty, Wood says. An empty dock means a user might look for another station or choose some other means of transportation. But with a full dock, you're stuck. With the bike, it's a much worse experience. Members-based rebalancing, Waldock tells me, it's a holy grail of bike share. Citibike has not invented it. Paris Vélib system, he notes, gives riders time bonuses for dropping off bikes at stations located in certain height above sea level. Bikes go downhill, Walnut explains, but no system has pursued rebalancing with as much thought, support, and scale as Citibike. Angels, now some 30,000 strong, account for roughly 30% of total bike rebalancing and more than 40% on days with multipliers. Most angels, like me, get a few points here or there in a small cluster or rack up a lot more, the 80-20 rule, the idea that a majority of effects are due to a minority of factors is a rule for a reason, says Waldock. The angel's success means that motivate plans on taking the program to its other bike share programs, starting with San Francisco Ford's Go Bikes, which launched its Angels program May 1st. Waldock, who came to the job from Bain Consulting, has a long interest in incentivizing behavior. One general finding is that it's easier to get someone to increase the frequency of a trip 3 days a week instead of 2, and that to get them to change their route, another reward should be immediate. People don't really like having to redeem something, Waldock says. That Citibike's class of incentive works is clear from the data, he says. You can see this shelf of people who end at 20 points in a month, enough to earn an extra week rather than 19. Altruism also drives angel behavior, he has. That's why when I tell you how many other riders you've helped, inside motivates sprawling, high-ceiling offices. Waldock gestures to a set of screens on the wall that are like a replica of the War Games big board. The system pulses with graphs, maps, and figures. How many riders are active? Which stations have technical problems? Waldock notes that the number of Citibike trips the day before, which was not a nice day at all, was as much as our system in Columbus, Ohio gets in almost an entire year. The key number of display in the Citibike's rideability metric, what percentage of time and for what percentage of riders are at least a few docks and bikes accessible. The way people look at bike share fallibility, Waldock says, was more crude. How many stations are empty? How many stations are filled? But as Wood notes, at the right place at the right time, an empty station could be a good thing. If you know there's about to be a wave of bikes. Users themselves are, of course, the greatest enemy of the rideability. Transportation planners like to say that the best way to predict a trip a person might make today is to look at the trip they made yesterday. Commute patterns are virtually hardwired. Just like the sunrise, you can count on more people and bikes migrating from Brooklyn to Manhattan every morning. That's vice versa, but randomness intrudes over half the system. Usage happens outside of peak commute hours. If it rains in the morning, fewer people will ride bikes. But if it gets nice in the afternoon, suddenly the bikes are not docked where they need to be. Wednesdays have their own rhythm, pure entropy. Miller recalls that's when Sunday nights gets really interesting, points-wise, because the system is trying to solve the earth for Monday morning. The system hint that a weird little pattern. The East Village has rush hour both for work and nightlife. People will ride to the Whole Foods, but laden with groceries, they will walk or take a taxi home. I began to imagine Waldock and the rest of the Citibike team staring at the docks on the big board, engaged in a massive game of chess with the user system. All this effort can seem a bit quaint, given that the bike share industry is experiencing a revolution that should lead to systems with no docks at all. Armed with GPS, unlocked via app, and computationally powered by users' smartphones, riders' data does not ride. Several people told me this is where the money is. Dockless bikes can be picked up and left basically anywhere. In other words, dockless bikes share via a half dozen VC-backed startups is already distributing the docking model, one that was barely off the ground to start with. In 2017, according to a recent NACTO report, the number of bike shares in the United States more than doubled, and most of them were dockless in April. Uber, presumably hoping to grab a piece of the last mile, too short to hail a ride, acquired Jump, a dockless e-bike share startup. Advocates pitch dockless as more robust solution to the problem of supply and demand. Sayan Conti, founder of Lime, says that his bike share company can surpass supply bottlenecks through saturation, in essence anticipating demand and oversupplying in an area of time. If 15 bikes migrate, you've got another 15 there, he told me. In a typical dock program, that would wipe out all bikes. Caroline Soprano, a long-time industry expert who recently joined the Chinese dockless company Ofo, at its head of policies in the Northeast, U.S. notes that are docked undersupply bikes to make sure spaces are available for docking. She suggests that the dockless model, less limited by infrastructure constraints, can not only improve the equity of bike share as a transport system, but it can also jumpstart commuting in American cities. That I am stopping here. The Outside magazine just got really long, and I'm only 3/4 of the way through. The Miller is why the feature for me that I was interested in, and it doesn't seem to retire. The reader returns to Miller. So listeners, again, I'm no longer reading the words of Outside magazine. These are the words of me, the reader, Tom Duty. I'm going to say the writer again. The writer's name is Vanderbilt, Tom Vanderbilt. So he appears to come back to Miller. So listeners, if you enjoy this maniac, Miller, as I did, his name's Joe Miller, and the writer Vanderbilt, Tom Vanderbilt, does return to Miller. So there is more text, and this is relatively easy to find with a citibike. Citibike Bike Angels in the first page. Outside magazine, August 7th, 2018. This has been Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty and a Google search from my site. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, good evening, or restful night's sleep. Ciao.